All right, so take your Bibles down. We're going to be tonight in chapter 22 of 1 Samuel. And while you're turning to that, I want to review just a little bit, because it's been a couple of weeks since we were here. And we're in the life of David now. And David is currently on the run. He's running for his life. Saul has a couple of times tried to kill him. David, actually, he even sent men to his house, and they were going to carry him in his bed. And so David escaped, and he went to Samuel and Ramah and Naoth, the school of the prophets there. And Saul sent men after him, and each group of men that came after David that time, the power of God fell on him. Saul even went himself. The power of God fell on him. And while Saul was under the influence of God there, prophesying without his kingly robes, then David left. And you'll remember he went to Nob. And in Nob, the high priest was kind of scratching his head, how come you're by yourself? And David lied to him. Can't excuse that. He did lie. And he said, I'm on the king's business. It's very urgent. I need some food. So he gave him the showbread. And he said, do you have a weapon here? Well, all I have is the sword of Goliath, the one that you got. And David said, all right, I'll take it. There's none like it. So he takes the sword of Goliath, realizes that Saul's going to get him, or probably will get him. Doesn't seem, he kind of wavers in his faith a little bit. So he goes across the border to Gath. And he's walking down the street in Gath, very likely with the sword over his shoulder. And people begin to whisper, because Gath is the hometown of Goliath, the guy that he killed. And somebody noticed who he was. They may have noticed it because of the sword that was slung across his back or at his side. And so they took him into the king, and David realized that he was in big trouble, and either panicked and had an epileptic fit, or faked that he was having an epileptic fit, and was clawing at the doors, letting the spit run down his beard, and making all kinds of crazy sounds. And Achish said, the guy's crazy, get him out of here. I got enough crazy people around here. And so David left. And that's where we come into chapter 22. And so now David leaves Gath, and he goes to the cave of Adullam. The cave of Adullam is an interesting place. It's a little, I believe I read that it was not too far from Bethlehem. And at any rate, Adullam is a place where there was a series of limestone caves, like pits that were almost square. They were underground, but it was a great place to conceal people. And so David goes there, and you'll notice that when his brothers and his father's household hears that he's there, they went down to him there. This brings out something to me that I think is very important, and it has to do with family. And I hope that all of you have at least some family members that this will be true of. But I want to say this to you. I want to say, appreciate and value your family members, because when things get tough, quite often they're the ones that are there. I look down through the years, my life down through the years, and I've had a lot of people come into my life, and a lot of people go out of my life, but my family's still there. My brother, I just was on the phone with him this afternoon. He's a year younger than I am. And he's there, and he understands what I'm going through. He's going through some similar situations himself. But I want to say this, his brothers and his father's household went down to him. They stood by him in this time of difficulty that David was in. Now, it could have been for some other reasons also. When you think about this, if Saul is as crazy as we're going to see him to be in this chapter, then David's family and his brothers were not safe. And it just so happens that this cave of Adullam is in the territory of Judah, and David may have very well felt like, okay, this is, I'm getting close to my family here, and I'm probably going to be safest here around them. And so they come down to him, and it says that all those who were in distress, were in debt, or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was recruiting a group of people to stand with me in a time of trial or difficulty, I'm not sure that I would go for those in distress or in debt or the discontented. David had a kind of a motley crew here that is gathered to him. Maybe the only ones, actually, I don't know, distressed, maybe not so bad, that maybe they were distressed because of the kingship of Saul and the fact that Saul was not following God. He was not walking with Jehovah. He was in disobedience, so they were distressed about it. But those are in debt. Now, it could be that Saul had imposed some inappropriate debts or some overwhelming debts on some people. I don't know about that. But the discontented also, they were discontented with Saul's leadership and his reign. And so anyway, these guys come, and now all of a sudden David has got a group of about 400 men with him. Now, he probably had men with him before, not when he went to see the actual priest, but it's very likely because when Jesus referred to the incident where David was given the showbread out of the temple, it refers to, and Jesus says something about him and the men that were with him. And so there were a few guys that were with David. You'll remember that I told you David is the kind of guy who, when you meet him, you like him. He's not the kind of guy that you meet and you're like scratching your head and you're wondering, man, how could anybody like that ever have gotten as high as they did in the kingdom? My goodness, I don't like the guy. He's what's wrong with me. That's not the way it was with David. When you met David, you're like, wow, I like that guy. I think he's really cool. And so he draws people around him, and now he's got these 400 guys that are around him. And I think there's a lesson even in that. And I think the lesson there is value those that God brings around you, regardless of their past. God may bring some very special people into your life, and if you look at them very closely, you may question. You ever hear that expression? I know I can say it, some of you will understand this. Never look a gift horse in the mouth. You know what that means. You say that to young people in today's society, and they're like, huh? What's wrong with being a horse dentist? I mean, yeah. Appreciate what you've got. The people that God brings around you, He has a reason. And these guys were the beginnings of David getting the support that he needs to step into the kingship at a later date. And so he's got these guys. Now, he has a legitimate concern, though. He goes and he leaves Adullam, this place where he was hiding out, and it says he went to Mizpah. Now, Mizpah was, the word Mizpah is a word that means watchtower. And so he goes to them, and he goes to the king of Moab, and he says, would you let my father and mother come and stay with you? Now, why would he go to Moab? There's a couple of reasons. Number one reason is because Moab was at war with Saul. They didn't like Saul. And another reason is that David is actually the great-grandson of a Moabite woman whose name was Ruth, and may very well have been known in that kingdom. And so David felt comfortable going to the king of Moab and saying, listen, mom and dad are getting older. I don't want them to have to run around with me while I'm running around the wilderness, running for my life. Can they stay with you? And the king of Moab said, yes, they can. And so he gives them time to stay with him. And then the prophet comes to David, and he says, don't stay in the stronghold. Don't stay down there in those caves. Go up into the land of Judah. Get even closer. There's some rationale for this. David is passing tests that are going to prove his worthiness to be the king. You'll remember that I told you Saul was given a changed heart by God, but Saul didn't do well with that changed heart. David is now being tested, and he's being prepared even before it's his time to become king. He's being tested, and he needs to be tested where some people that are watching can see what's happening. And it's important for a leader to be tested and to be proven. So the prophet Gad says, don't stay there, go into the land of Judah. Now, I find this really interesting. Another lesson that I see here is that if God sends a warning to you through another person, even if you don't understand why, listen to it. David may not have understood why. Gad was speaking on the authority of God. God had spoken to Gad. Now, maybe, where did Gad come from? Well, Gad probably came from the school of prophets. And he's probably somebody that Samuel had sent to be with David so that David could have the advice of a godly man like Gad. And so Gad says, listen, here's what God's saying. Don't stay here. Go up into the land of Judah. So David doesn't worry about it. He trusts the process. David is going to be the first truly theocratic king. He's going to be the first one to actually listen to what God says through the prophets and then to do it. In fact, David doesn't just listen when the prophets come to him. You're going to see, even in today's lesson, David goes to God and says, should I do this? Should I proceed with this? Should I do this particular thing? And God will answer him, and God gives him much blessing as a result of it. Now, forgive me for this, but I have to speculate about something, okay? The next statement I find fascinating. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. Now, this is purely speculation. It's just something I wonder about. And I've wondered about it every time I teach through this passage. David, in his time of wandering, his time of being a vagabond, being a fugitive, being wanted by the king, king's after him, trying to get him, David was always doing good for other people. We're going to see tonight how he goes to the town of Keilah. And Keilah is being attacked by the Philistines, and David goes, at God's direction, David goes, and he delivers that town. He's a fugitive. He's running for his life, but he's doing good in the process, and he's living in the forest. What does that sound like to you?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist? Think tradition. Think England. A fugitive, running for his life, doing good to the people in the countryside. Huh? Robin Hood. I wonder. I have no scriptural authority at all for this, okay? This is pure speculation. But you realize that Robin Hood is a legend, okay? And I wonder if the legend began in England, or did it begin from somebody in Scripture who was a fugitive, running for his life, but yet took time to do good to other people. Now, legends evolve down through time. We don't know anywhere where David, well, I shouldn't say that. There were times when David would attack a city and wipe the city out completely and take the spoils and give them to people, kind of like Robin Hood did. So this is something I just wonder about. I wonder if it wasn't some kind of a legend that was passed down and kind of got twisted from what Scripture actually says. But I really find it interesting that David the fugitive, the blessed, the good man, with his band of men, is living in the forest of Hereth. Just find that kind of interesting. Okay, so now Saul hears that David and his men have been discovered. Saul is sitting, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree. It was quite common in those days for the kings to hold court outside in an area where there were trees and it was open. And the fact that he's sitting there holding the spear, and again I saw this here, almost every time you see Saul, he's got that spear. I thought maybe I used to think it was because he was so insecure, and it may be. He was very insecure, very paranoid. But also, I think that spear was kind of like the scepter back in that day and time. And if you had the spear, you were the king. And so David and his men have been discovered. And Saul is sitting, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah. He's got all his officials standing by his side. Now I want you to listen to this man. This is a man who, when he started out as king, had a changed heart. This is the man who stood head and shoulders over the rest of the people. This is the man who was a nice-looking man, chosen by God. Now I want you to listen to him. Listen, men of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you've all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me. Poor Saul. Or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does this day. Wow. Talk about paranoia. There's a lesson here, a very strong lesson. You cannot allow paranoia in your head because it'll drive you crazy. It really will. If you give it an inch, it'll take 6 inches. And if you let it take that 6 inches, it'll take a foot, and it will keep taking over. Saul is being consumed by this paranoia, and his mind is being twisted, and he's saying, my servant, he's talking about David, is lying in wait for me. David wasn't lying in wait for Saul. David was not doing anything to hurt Saul. David just wanted to live. He just wanted to stay alive. And he's got all these paranoid delusions. And he's got self-pity that's mixed in with that. And the guy is really, he's about to drown in his own insanity here. I really feel sorry for Saul. I mean, Saul brought it on himself. But I feel sorry for him being in such a condition. This was the man that God chose and anointed to be the king of Israel. He was supposed to win the Lord's battles. He was supposed to have a long and successful reign as the first king of Israel. And here he is, down his own pathway, doing his own thing. And now paranoia is beginning to grip him, and it's beginning to control him. So he's sneaking, and you've got all these officials standing around, and some wannabe officials also. He says, Doeg the Edomite speaks up. Now, this is not even an Israelite, okay? He's an Edomite. He was standing with Saul's officials. Doeg's a wannabe. He's close to Saul, and according to the Jewish Talmuds, this Doeg is actually the servant that was with Saul back in chapters 9 or 10 when the donkeys were lost and they first met Samuel. This is the same guy. It is also the same guy who later, the Talmud says, the Jewish commentaries say, that he's the guy who is now Saul's armor bearer, and he's the one who actually runs him through with the sword, or refuses to, and then Saul falls on his own sword, and this guy does the same. So anyway, he speaks up. Here's how he begins to kind of get into Saul's graces and move up, even though he's not an Israelite. He says, I saw the son of Jesse come to Abimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Now remember that when we talked about David being there at Nob and meeting with the high priest, it says Doeg was there, detained before the Lord. And David noticed that, and David got out of there really quickly. So Doeg speaks up. And so he sends for the priest. So Ahimelech comes. Now you remember, when David first went to see Ahimelech, it says that Ahimelech was just a little nervous. He said, how come you came alone? Where's everybody else? And David explained it away, and Ahimelech accepted his answer. And so now Ahimelech comes, and I'm sure some time has passed. Saul's sitting there, he's got his spear, there's all his officials around. Doeg has spoken up. And so he says, okay, somebody go to Nob, and you bring the priest, and bring all of the male members of his family. It was 85 of them. Okay? Now remember, this is the family of Eli. Do you remember a prophecy that was made about the family of Eli? After Eli's 2 sons had become so wicked and so messed up, a prophecy was made that said that the priesthood would be taken away from them and none of their men would reach old age. Okay? I need to take a pause and restart this thing, and then we'll pick up there.